Okay, so David mentioned Chizkiyahu Melech earlier, and as we say his namesake, the great Tana Chizkiyahu is the subject of a lot of our discussions over the last few weeks. We are in Nun Gimel Amid Beis. Nun Gimel Amid Beis. I would say it's about maybe 15 lines from the top in the middle of the page. Rav Huna bar Rabbi Yehuda. It starts with Rav Huna bar Rabbi Yehuda. And we're going to continue on the discussion of there's a brisa which we read a couple of weeks ago and we continue to discuss. It was on Nun Gimel Amid Aleph, and that brisa says Masa Sheni Bottle Baruba, that Masa Sheni is Bottle Barov. This is the brisa. Ube'eza Masa Sheni Amru. And what type of Masa Sheni are we talking about in that brisa? So the Gemara explains to us that it's she'ein bo shava pruta, where the Masa Sheni is not worth a shava pruta, so you cannot redeem it because the only thing you can redeem is something with a minimum value of a pruta. Therefore, it's bottle barov because bittul is the fallback. And then the second half of that brisa, which we read and discussed, was Yerushalayim v'yotza. And the circumstance was where the person was ola regel with the money or the food, depending now, and he went into Yerushalayim and he left. That was the brisa. We have since in the last few weeks talked about this brisa at length and tried to understand what it means, shenichtas v'yotzo, why did he go out, what does it mean? The Gemara tries to explain, well, it means that the walls of Yerushalayim fell down, so to speak. I mean, there was no longer a Beis HaMikdash, and it happened exactly when the person was Ola Regel, he came into Yerushalayim. Now he's obligated to eat that food. He can no longer exchange the food. And before he can eat the food, the walls of Yerushalayim fall down, meaning the Meshachar of Beis HaMikdash. So now he can't eat the food because there's no Beis HaMikdash, and he can't redeem it because the food that was brought into Yerushalayim is no longer redeemable. So that's the catch-22 where the Gemara was trying to explain to us. So what do? So we said at the end of the day, he can't redeem it, so you have to be mevatel it. In other words, bittul can help as a fallback even when you can't be matir, when you can't redeem. So the Gemara was trying to give all these permutations. So now we're at the point where we said that, okay, the last thing that we learned at the end of last week was that we came to the conclusion that we said at the end of the day, and again we made the chilek between whether it's Masa Sheni midoraisa or Masa Sheni midorabanan, and the Gemara says that at the end of the day that the Rabbanan say lo plug, and that there's no distinction whether the walls of Yerushalayim were standing or not. In either case, you can be mevatel. So now the Gemara, again, consistently wants to try to prop up Chizkiyahu and see whether the halacha is like Chizkiyahu, because Chizkiyahu gave us a chiddush. The chiddush of Chizkiyahu, if you remember, was that just as the brisa says, if you have Masa Sheni that you've collected, and then by accident, some Masa Sheni was not collected, and the amount that was not collected is less than a Shava Pruta, and Chazal tell us that you have to have at least Shava Pruta in order to redeem. So what do? So then you've been vatal. Says Chizkiyahu, no, you're not mevatel, because remember, the principle is when you can be matir, you're not mevatel. As long as you can redeem, you can't nullify. So, but how can you redeem if it's less than a Shava Pruta? So Chizkiyahu came up with the chiddush that what you do is you take the value of that less than Shava Pruta and you attach it to the previous Masa Sheni that you've already redeemed with a coin. And the presumption always is that you didn't redeem every last space on that coin, theoretically. So there is space on the coin for further redemption. And if you have less than Shava Pruta, you attach it to that coin and make it, and therefore that less than Shava Pruta becomes kodesh. I mean, you take off the kedusha and you put it on the coin, and since you can redeem, then you're not mavatal. So that brisa, which says that you're mavatal when it's less than shava pruta, doesn't come out like Chizkiah, because Chizkiah says no. Even in the case where it's less than shava pruta, you don't have to nullify it. You can redeem it on that coin. Yeah, Jay.
So the theme here of this whole discussion, because it's a theoretical discussion,
Right.
balls are coming down. So the theme here is either to emphasize the role of Mavatel or to emphasize the fact that you can attach something to another group.
Correct.
What is the purpose of the Gemara is to emphasize which one of the two that I just raised?
Because, well, I mean, the purpose of the Gemara is at the time certainly was to declare a halacha. What's the halacha if you have Masa Sheni? If you have Masa Sheni, can you be mevatel it, or can you not be mevatel? Because the principle is you're not mevatel if you can be matir. So as long as you can be matir, as long as you can make it permissible, then you're not bittul. Now the bittul is kind of looked at as the lowest common denominator of how you take kodesh and you avoid the kedusha by saying it gets absorbed in chol, and therefore we have a principle of batel barov, or in some cases batel b'meya, but batel barov. So to answer your question, the point of the Gemara is what's the halacha? When do we allow bittul to happen and say, Farfallen, we lost, we can't be Mekadesh anymore, so we're Mavatal. Says the Gemara, according to Chizkiah, you almost never have to be Mavatal, because even when you have less than a Shava Pruta, which is the most extreme case where you can't be Matir, you can't be Matir less than a Pruta, but Chizkiah came up with this novel approach of attachment. I'll attach it to something that was already Kodesh, and therefore, since it's less than a Shava Pruta is so minute, I'm going to allow it to become part of that coin. The coin is already exchanged. Now I have to go to Yerushalayim and use that coin for food. I'll attach the less than Shava Pruta onto that coin, and then I'll have to come on to Bittel. It's all motivated by the principle of let's not be Mavatal.
Okay,
let us try to avoid bittul lahalocha, Jay. Let us try to avoid bittul at all costs.
Okay.
Even though the rabbi said bittul is a perfectly acceptable way of removing the kedusha, but once you're mavatal, you take it off. You take the kedusha off forever. If you're matir onto the coin, it's still kodesh until you get to Yerushalayim and eat it. So, what would you rather have? A semblance of kedusha that you can eat in Yerushalayim, or wiping out all the kedusha by saying it's
that's
mavatal.
The theme in terms of trying to avoid mavatal.
Right, we're trying to avoid mavatal. Right. So now let's go into this Gemara, and the Gemara is going to try to take a different approach with Chizkiah. What's the approach? Rav Huna bar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav Sheshes. Rav Huna bar Yehuda says in the name of Rav Sheshes, Choda Katani. Okay, our brisa, which I read earlier, which we've been learning for a few weeks, has 2 points. The first point of the brisa was that if it's less than shava masa sheni, that's less than a shava pruta, you can be mavatel. And then the second point was b'shenichnas Yerushalayim v'yatza. And we asked the question, what does it mean? He goes to Yerushalayim and goes out. It's kind of cryptic, and we explained what that means. But those were 2 different cases, 2 different events that the brisa was teaching us. Gemara now says no. Let's revise that and say that whole story that we just said, it's one story. What happened? What happened? So this is what happened. Masa sheni she'ein bo shava pruta shenichlas liyushalayim v'yatza. So now let's look at that brisa again on Nun Gimel and Aleph and read it differently. The Masa sheni that was not worth a shava pruta, that's what you brought into Yerushalayim and left Yerushalayim, rather than saying they're 2 different events. Okay, so if you say that, okay, what does that tell us? So now the Mishnah is telling, the Brisa is telling us that Masa Sheni that's not worth a Shava Pruta, that went into Yerushalayim and left Yerushalayim, then you can be Mavatal. In other words, now we have a very specific event of Bittul, which even Chizkiah L'chaira would agree to. Because remember, Chizkiah doesn't want to be Mavatal anything. He wants to find ways to be Matir. But he'll agree that when it's less than a Sheva Pruta, and you went into Yerushalayim, and you left Yerushalayim, in other words, you did all of those things, now for Fallen, you can no longer be Matir, you have to be Mavatal. So again, the Gemara is going back and forth and trying to find whether Chizkiah can live with the Brisa, because up till now, Chizkiah and the Brisa are at odds. So the Gemara says, you know what, I'm going to take a different approach. I'm going to say that what the Brisa told us was not two events, but one event. And in that case of one event, Chizkiah will agree that you can be Mavatal. Because once it's less than a Sheva Pruta and you went into Yerushalayim and came out, you can no longer be Matir according to Chizkiah. So what choice do you have? So Chizkiah will be forced to say Bittul. And then the world will be right, because Chizkiah will agree with the Brisa that you can be Mavatal. Jay, that's how much the Gemara wants to try to sort of balance the whole thing, to say that we're trying to avoid a machlokes between Chizkiah and all the other Tanoim by saying that Chizkiah's case is a very specific case. But in the case of the Brisa, he will agree to Bittul because because not only was it less than Sheva Pruta, it was Nichnas Yerushalayim v'yatza. Okay, so l'chaira with that. In that context, Chizkiah can agree. Okay, Frek the Gemara, even now in that situation, why can you do Bittul? That now we're going to ask the same question we asked before. Why should you be able to do Bittul? V'nahade v'nale v'nichle. Let him retrace his steps, come back into Yerushalayim. We asked this question earlier. And then we gave a different answer. But now that you want to reconcile and say that the Brisa is a different interpretation of the Brisa than we had before, I'll ask you the same question. Why is Bittul okay? He should go back into Yerushalayim, still have the opportunity to redeem, and Chizkiah will say he'll redeem. So how can you now say, oh, this is proof positive, that Chizkiah will agree that Bittul helps? Why will Bittul help? Let him go back into Yerushalayim. So what happened? He left Yerushalayim, he'll retrace his steps, go back into Yerushalayim, and now he'll be able to redeem it, because in Yerushalayim you can redeem it. So the Gemara's kasha is the same kasha as before, even on the new set of facts. Why is it not the same? So that's the Gemara's kasha here. And the Gemara is going to give an answer. So now we went through a series of questions and answers before, which we're going to do now again, but and you're going to recognize it. But what's the Gemara's answer? The Nafel Mechitzas. The same answer we gave before. The Mechitzas fell, meaning that there was no longer a Beis HaMikdash. So what does it help to retrace your steps and go back into Yerushalayim and what? Eat it? You can't eat it. There's no Beis HaMikdash. So now we're into the same problem that we had the first time. So the Gemara gives the same answer. Then the Gemara gives an answer, asks another question, V'nifrakei, right? So what's the big deal? Even though he goes back to Yerushalayim, let him redeem it. There's no reason why you can't redeem it, even if you're going back into Yerushalayim, right? So now the Gemara gives the same answer again. Retracing the answers, Omar Rava mechitza lechol d'oraisa, that having the Beis Hamikdash is eating Masa Sheni is d'oraisa. Mechitza liklot d'Rabbanan. But the inyan of mechitza when the mechitza falls to take that food into the mechitza, so to speak, that it should be part of it, that's only midrabanan. So what does that mean? V'chigazu rabbanan ki is to the mechitzas. So in other words, the rabbis were trying to establish something that midoraisa we already said doesn't apply. Masa Sheni only applies midoraisa when the Beis HaMikdash is up. When it's not up, no Masa Sheni. Comes the Rabbanan, and they want to have a remnant of Masa Sheni, even when there is no Beis HaMikdash, meaning you can't bring it up. So therefore, they say that it still has an inyan of Masa Sheni. Midaraisa, there's no longer Masa Sheni when it falls, right? But the Rabbanan are the ones who are Masa Sheni. It's all Masa Sheni Midrabanan because they want to cling on to this principle and not lose it forever. Says the Gemara, when are the Rabbanan geyser that there's still a Masa Sheni, that you cannot redeem it? That's only when there is a mechitza. But ki less than the mechitzas lo geyser Rabbanan. But when there's no mechitza, meaning there's no Beis HaMikdash, then the rabbis no longer said that you can't redeem, right? So if you can still redeem, then we're back to the same kasha. Why does Chizkiah say, I'll agree to bittul? Why are you agreeing to bittul? Midrabanan, you can still redeem it. And as long as there's a possibility of redemption, Chizkiah will not back down. He won't say you can do bittul. Again, because bittul is the extreme lowest common denominator, and he wants to get away from that. So as long as there's a possibility of redemption, that you can be matir, he wants to be matir. So we have the same kasha. Again, I'm repeating the kasha from before, but the reason why it comes up again is because we have a new set of facts, and we're trying to see whether these new set of facts change the landscape. And up to now, it hasn't changed the landscape. The fact that it's one story in the Bryce as opposed to two has not changed our thinking. And for the Gemara, lo plug rabbanan, that and now that don't have a Beis HaMikdash, the rabbis say that there's no chilik, and you can no longer have any kind of matirin. You have to come to nullification. So again, at this point, the Chayra Chizkiah agrees that you can have a bittul because you can't have matir. Again, going through the same cycle. Frek the Gemara, ihachi, ma'iria, aimbo shava pruta, afili yeshbo nami. Why do you have to tell us in this brisa that it was less than a shava pruta, which is what Chizkiah hangs his hat on, and saying that even less than a shava pruta I can redeem? Why do you have to even talk about less than a shava pruta? Even if it's worth a pruta, a full pruta, you can't redeem it. So the reason why you're not redeeming is not because it's not worth a pruta, because even if it's worth a pruta, you can't redeem when there's no Beis HaMikdash and you can't eat it, you can't do anything with it. Therefore, you have to nullify, you have to be mevatel. So what's the point of now? Every word counts. So why do you say ein bo shava pruta? I feel it be yesh bo shava pruta. So now the Gemara gives a novel answer. The Gemara says, Lo maboya ka'amar. Lo maboya, it's not quite a kal v'chomer, but it is a lo maboya. In other words, we don't only state the halacha. In one case, we'll state it in another case. What does that mean here? So the Brisa is telling us that lo maboya yeshbo. Of course, when the Masa Sheni was worth a pruta, right? And so once it leaves Yerushalayim, you could no longer redeem it. Fine. How do you know if less than a shava pruta also? The Katan le mechitzas, why can't you redeem it? Because the walls fell, and therefore midrabanan, there's no deraisa to eat, and therefore you can't redeem, and you have to be mevatel. Aval einbo, but we would have thought that if the Masa Sheni is not worth a pruta, ema lo koltolo mechitzas, then you might take the position that this whole idea of the walls of taking in the Masa Sheni does not apply, and therefore you can actually be podeh. In other words, we would make a distinction between yeshbo shava pruta and einbo shava pruta. If it has a shava pruta, fine, I understand why you can't redeem. But if it doesn't have a shava pruta, why can't you redeem? Why can't you redeem? Chomash malon. So the Brisa comes to tell us, no, that even when there's less than a shava pruta, that you can't redeem, and you have to be mevatel. So again, Chizkiah at the end comes out by agreeing in the situation where it's not a shava pruta, and and the walls of Yerushalayim fell, meaning that there's not the ability to eat it, that as a fallback, you can be mevatel. Okay, so again, it's fascinating to see how much the Gemara wanted to try to prop up Chizkiah and to find a way for Chizkiah's point of view to prevail, that you're not mevatel. And this goes to the point, Jay, that I was saying earlier, is that bittul is the last resort, and if we can avoid bittul, we try to do it at all costs. So the Gemara, both in these previous weeks and today, even with the new scenario that we're talking about, is constantly trying to find a way to avoid bittul and to redeem, because that's the higher calling, that you should redeem this Maser Sheni. At the end of the day, the Gemara kind of says, well, I don't have a way to do it. I don't have a way to do it. So even Chizkiah will agree that in particular circumstances, you can be mevatel and not redeem.
It must have been very exciting to sit in to this debate.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
In the yeshiva when they went back and forth.
And the back and forth, exactly right.
But it's taken them a week to do this.
I'm going to give you one example. Havdil. We have a Supreme Court, right? The highest court of the land, and they issue edicts, and it's fascinating. There are Supreme Court watchers who always follow the Supreme Court, how nuanced the Supreme Court is, lahavdil, to make law, to make halacha in the narrowest possible way, so that it should not impact other types of questions on similar cases that may come up, and still give an opportunity to have another review of the case with a slightly different nuance. And to your point, how fascinating it would be to sit into a Supreme Court deliberation when you have the 9 wise men and women who are trying to grapple with these very complicated questions. And of course, people around the country are bashing them all the time for being this, for being that. But they have no idea how complicated halacha is when you want to make law and you want to do it carefully. What you have to take in consideration, what is appropriate, what is not appropriate. Again, it is a very fascinating and difficult undertaking that the court has, and that's what the Chazal in the time of the Gemara were doing the same thing. They were issuing edicts and halachas for the Bnei Yisrael, and they had to find ways. Can you imagine? Maser Sheni was a big thing, and everybody was going to Eretz Yisrael for Maser Sheni, and look how complicated it becomes. You're a farmer, and you have food, and it's going to spoil, and I want to put it on a coin, but then I didn't put everything on a coin. I forgot to put some things on a coin. What do I do? Can I be mevatel? Do I have to? Can I tag? I mean, you think about this in a larger sense, and you really understand how people who were righteous were very makbid that they shouldn't. You don't want to leave untithed Maser Sheni on the field. Someone can come along and eat it, and he's over a lav. He eats on a tevel. He's eating tevel because it hasn't been tithed. So even Maser Sheni, not Maser Rishon, Maser Sheni has important implications for everybody. Anyway, it's just one little bird's eye view into this whole shaila. Okay, now we're going to turn to something also extremely interesting. And again, you talk about plowing the depths. We have a halacha, which we've quoted, that with Maser Sheni, if you're going to redeem your own Maser Sheni, you have to add a chomesh. What does that mean? That whatever the Maser Sheni is, you have to add 1/5 extra that has to go to Yerushalayim, which you eat, but you have to bring that extra 20%, that extra chomesh. Okay, so you think that's pretty simple. It sounds like a very straightforward process. Says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan, in Goal Yigal Ish Mimasro. The Torah says in Devarim, in Vayikra, that if a person redeems from his Maser, Mimasro, so we learn out from this that he has to add a chomesh from this word. Why? Because it says Mimasro, velo kol masro. So he can redeem mimasro, and we learn velo kol masro, but not all of his maser. What does that mean? So from here, we're going to learn out not only the idea of the chomesh, which we learn from Masro, but the Gemara wants to darshan when it says Masro, prat l'maser sheni she'ein bo shava pruta, that you can redeem your maser, but not maser that wasn't worth a shava pruta. So we're interpreting that the Torah is telling us and anticipating, right, that if I give maser sheni and some of my maser sheni gets overlooked and it's still in the field, and that maser sheni is not worth a pruta, right? I cannot redeem it. That's what we want to learn out from the words mimasro, velo kol masro. So we learn two things. We learn first that you have to add a chomesh, and secondly, that if you redeem your maser and you leave out some maser that wasn't redeemed, that's no longer redeemable. Okay, that's the interpretation of what the pasuk in Vayikra is telling us. Okay, interesting. Everyone might not have understood that that's what we learn out, but Chazal tell us that's what we learn out from the pasuk, that redemption only happens when it's worth a pruta, but if you miss it, then then now we come to the question of bittul, but we're not going to get into that question right now. Okay. Now, so that's the stage, right? A person gives maser sheni, he has to add a chomesh, that he has to then bring up to Yerushalayim, and that he has to eat in Yerushalayim. Seems pretty simple. I mean, it gets pretty straightforward. Says the Gemara like this. Itmar, I'm going to present to you a machloikis in what we just said. Itmar, Rav Ami Omar, Rav Ami says that when it says that, remember the add-on, what we're learning pshat, that if it's not worth a shava pruta, you can't redeem it. Rav Ami says that refers to the maser sheni. If the maser sheni that you took is not worth a pruta, then you can't redeem it. That's what we would understand. Rav Asi Omar, Rav Asi says, no, the Brisa is not talking about the maser sheni. The Brisa is talking about the chomesh. In other words, if you have to bring a chomesh, and the chomesh is not worth a pruta, and I'll give you an example of how that works. But if not the maser sheni is worth a pruta, but the chomesh, which you're now obligated to give on top of the maser sheni, is not worth a pruta. That's what we're talking about, that you can't redeem. What does that mean? Okay, let's give an example. If a person has, let's see if Rashi talks about it.
So he has a certain size field.
Okay, the last of the narrow lines before it gets wide in Rashi, on the bottom, towards the bottom. Rav Ami Omar, Ein bo shava pruta, Shaninu we learn, Avalim yesh bo shava pruta, bar ge'ulahu v'tofris b'jono. But if it is a pruta, then it can be redeemed, and he takes his pigeon and he goes to Yerushalayim. So in other words, if the maser sheni is worth the pruta, it's okay. Rav Asi Omar, Ein b'chom shava pruta, Shaninu the lav bar ge'ulahu. Now you can no longer redeem achie bo shavin arba prutas. It has to be worth 4 prutas. We'll explain in a minute. They shiroi the toisefes chomesh dikosav b'haikro. Okay, let's look at it this way. You have maser sheni. It's worth 4 prutas. That you can redeem. Everybody agrees. But you have to give a chomesh. What is chomesh? 20%. What's 20% of 4 prutas? Less than a pruta, right? You can't redeem less than a pruta. So according to Rav Asi, you can no longer bring that entire Masa Sheni to Yerushalayim, because in total, with the Chomesh, it's not worth a pruta, and it has to be at least worth a pruta in order to redeem it. So now you have a circumstance where, according to Rav Ami, you can redeem because the principal Masa Sheni was worth what? It was worth 4 prutas, so it's clearly redeemable. But according to Rav Asi, who says, but you got to factor in the Chomesh, and the Chomesh isn't a pruta, now the whole thing gets canceled out. So you see, in a circumstance where you clearly have enough Masa Sheni, and according to Rav Asi, you can't redeem it because the Chomesh doesn't add up to a pruta. Amazing.
So why don't you say below a certain field size, you're not going to get enough to redeem because together with the Chumash, you don't have enough.
Right. So
it limits the size of the field that you're required to do Masa Sheni on.
Yes, it either limits the size of the field, or in the other case, you forgot. In other words, we're even talking about the forgotten portion. Let's say the field is big. Let's say you redeem Masa Sheni, and now you're talking about the second Masa Sheni that you forgot. So you're right. It could be a small field or a large field where you forgot to tithe part of the Masa Sheni, and now you're going to go back and tithe. And since you have to give a Chomesh, and you don't have enough for the Chomesh because the Masa Sheni is 4 prutas and the Chomesh is less than a pruta.
But why can't they set a standard that says you need so much Masa Sheni and the Chumash is added together? It's one number when you add them together.
That's according to according to Rav Asi. According to Rav Ami, the Chumash doesn't count. It's the Masa Sheni that has to have the value of a pruta, and if you have 4 prutas worth of Masa Sheni, you're good to go. It's only Rav Asi who adds that no, the Chomesh has to be part of what you're giving, and if the Chomesh pulls you down, it pulls you down.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So that's the machlokes.
But he's separating the Chumash from the Masa Sheni when in fact they're really legally
go together.
required to have the combination to begin with.
Right. Well, that's the machlokes between Rav Ami and Rav Asi. Do you factor them together or do you factor them separately? If you factor them separately, like Rav Ami does, you have a problem. It's only Rav Asi who says from the lashon of the pasuk, I have to have enough Masa Sheni to cover the Chomesh as well. And if the Chomesh doesn't have Masa enough to cover, then the whole thing falls apart. That's his interpretation. He has a very different look at Masa Sheni, because he says the Chomesh is part of it. It's not 2 separate things, right, Masa Sheni and a Chomesh. It's one thing.
But yeah, the other thing though is that if it's that small, that's not a Shava Pruta. The whole idea of redeeming and then taking the money to Yerushalayim and all that is because it's too much to schlep.
Right.
This, it sounds like it's like a little package and you schlep it along. So you have your money from the other stuff that you already redeemed or whatever. And so you got this little bit of the thing that you bring along when you go to Yerushalayim.
You would think, Menashe, yes, I would agree with you. You would think, what's the big deal? But again, the Gemara is now focusing in on the minutia of the actual halacha. You're right. What's the big deal of taking a little bit more, adding it on to the coin or to the food?
No, I'm saying not even adding to the coin. Let's say you can't, whatever. We say it's too small to even add it, whatever. So it's one thing. You're not going to bring 10 bushels of grain, but a little bag of something that's half a pruta is no big deal to schlep.
Throw it on the wagon. It's not a big deal.
Right. But now you see that the Gemara is saying, but the Torah is telling us that in order to put it on the wagon, there has to be a minimum standard. The minimum standard is that it has to be in total, either total or not, a Shava Pruta. And when it's not a Shava Pruta, you're stuck. Again, this goes to the bittul question. Okay, I can't redeem it. What's my choice? I got to be mevatel. I'm not going to let it be tevel and someone's going to be over a lav. I've got to do something with this food to prevent, let's say, lifnei iver, that someone should come by, see some food, pick it up and eat it, and bingo, he's eaten tevel. So what do we do? So in order to avoid bittul, this whole discussion is motivated by the principle that we don't want to be mevatel. I mean, we can always be mevatel. That's the lowest common denominator. We can be mevatel and say it's over, batel barov. But we're trying to avoid bittul, and we're saying to avoid bittul, you have to redeem, but you can't redeem. You can't redeem because you don't have shava pruta. So you're right. Everyone is right in saying it's so small, it's a package, let's add it on, and let's not make a big deal. The only reason why we're making a big deal is for the strict letter of the law. How do we make it so that no one is going to be over the lav? And yet we don't want to be mevatel. What are we going to do? Give me a novel answer as to how we're going to get from here to there without bittul. Bittul is always a possibility, but if we don't be mevatel, so the Gemara brings this interesting machlekes between Rav Ami and Rav Asi, and tries to show who is right. So listen to this. Okay, so we have a machlekes as to now the Gemara says not only is it a machlekes tanoim, it's a machlekes amaroim. Rabbi Yochanan Omar Aimbo that so Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rav Ami that it refers only to the actual principle. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Amar, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish is ein b'chomsho that if it's not if there isn't a pruta in the chomesh, then it doesn't work. So you see that not only the Tanoim argued on this, the Amoraim didn't have a better answer. They too argued on the same question and said whether or not it's in the Chomish itself or it's in the Maser. Which one is it? Okay, so we see this sometimes, not always, but sometimes you see that the Amoraim later on come up with in other words, the Amoraim are trying to answer the kashas that the Tanoim had, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. And here they didn't, because the Amoraim had the same machlekes that Rav Ami Rav Ashi had as now Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Shimon ben Lakish. Okay, so obviously this is a powerful question, and the question is, how do we deal with it? Who's right? Says the Gemara, Mesaveh. Let me ask you a kasha, okay? So this is a kasha now on Rav Ami and Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Ami and Rabbi Yochanan say that the chomesh has to be on the Masa Sheni itself. Once the Masa Sheni has a chomesh, then it's fine. You don't. Once the Masa Sheni has a pruta, then it's okay. And the chomish tags along. We don't worry about the chomish. The chomish isn't going to drive the Masa Sheni. Masa Sheni is going to drive the wagon, and as long as there is Shava Pruta in the Masa Sheni, then you can redeem. That's Rabbi Yochanan, and that's Rav Ami. Frek the Gemara, Mesaveh. Okay, let me ask you a kasha. Okay, so in that halacha, it says, Dayo, it's enough. Sheyoymar hu v'chomsho mecholel al mosa b'shoynus. Right? That in this machlokes we have the lashon Dayo. It's enough that we say that the Masa Sheni and the Chomesh mecholel al mos or b'shoynus. So, in other words, in Chizkiya's view, who says that you can tag the less than Shava Pruta onto the previous coin, right? That was his position. So he will say that the Masa Sheni and the Chomesh together, Mechoilel al Maas HaRishonos, can be tagged onto the coin that you've already used for Masa Sheni. What does that mean? That means that l'chayra, if you have Masa Sheni that is not worth a Shava Pruta, even with the Chomesh, it's not worth a Shava Pruta, right? It's the only way you can interpret it. So the Chomesh and the Masa Sheni together are not worth a Shava Pruta. According to Chizkiah, you can attach that to the coin that you've already used to be poda, to redeem Masa Sheni.
The
Okay,
regular Maser.
say it again.
Is that the redeem Maser Sheni or the regular Maser?
No, Masa
the
Sheni.
regular.
Yeah, no, we're talking about Masa Sheni. So in other words, according to Chizkiah, since you already redeemed Masa Sheni, but this is left over, and what's left over? A less than Shava Pruta of both Maser and Chomesh. Both of them together are not worth a Pruta in the example that I gave. So according to Chizkiah, you can attach it to the previous coin and it's okay. Right?
So you don't have to do Bito
Right.
to get away from that Bito.
Right. So that's the interpretation. Says the Gemara, Bishleimer Lamanda Omar Ein Bechomsho. According to the Manda Omar, who says that, meaning Ravasi and Reb Shimon Lakish, that the Chomesh, it wasn't worth a Shava Pruta, and therefore you can't be paid it if, according to them, Hanediktani Dio. I understand why you say the word Dio, it's enough. Why? Because the Af al Gav, the Bididei Isbei, even though according to the Brisa, the Masacheni itself has Shava Pruta, given the Bechum Shaleka Shapir. Since there is no Shava Pruta in the Chomesh, then Chizkiah's Chiddush comes to be. Because remember, in this particular example, the Masa Sheni itself was worth a Pruta. So there's no point in discussing Chizkiah. Chizkiah's Chiddush is only when it's not worth a Pruta. And since Chizkiah is going to say that in this case, where the combination of the Masa Sheni and the Chomesh are not worth a Pruta, you can still redeem it onto the coin. Okay, now it comes out okay that the Chiddush is that when you have Masa Sheni and you have Chomesh, the two together don't equal a Pruta. Chizkiah says that you can attach it. Elalamanda Omar de Einbo, but according to the Rav Ami and Rabbi Yochanan, the other Manda Omars, who say that the Shava Pruta refers to the Masa Sheni itself, not the Chomesh, that there wasn't the value of a Pruta in the actual Masa Sheni. My Dio, what is the meaning it's sufficient? That's exactly where the halacha is. In other words, the original halacha of Chizkiah was when the Masa Sheni was less than a Pruta, you can attach it to the coin. That was the principle. Nothing to do with Chomesh, just the Masa Sheni. We're now saying, but how do you treat the Masa Sheni? How do you treat the Chomesh? Masa Sheni, if it was less than a Shava Pruta, Chizkiah says you can attach it. I got it. But now if you have Masa Sheni and a Shava and a Chomesh, which together do not equal a Pruta, then I understand the Chiddush that you say Dio, that it's enough that you're allowed to do it, because otherwise I would think that you can't do it. The Chiddush is that even when the Chomesh added to the Masa Sheni is not worth a Shava Pruta, Chizkiah allows it to be redeemed. And whose position is that? That's the position of Rav Asi and Reb Shimon ben Lakish. But according to Rabbi Yochanan and according to Rav Ami, who say that it refers to the actual Masa Sheni, of course Chizkiah is going to allow you to add it. That's his whole point. So the Gemara wants to say from this, it's a raya that the discussion here is in Rav Asi and Rav Shimon ben Lakish, not in Rav Ami and Rabbi Yochanan, because Rav Ami and Rabbi Yochanan, stands to reason that you are allowed to add it on. The Chiddush is that even when you add the Chomesh and there's not a Shava Pruta, Chizkiah's position still comes through. In other words, Chizkiah allows the redemption even when you have a Chomesh that is not worth a Shava Pruta and drags down the Masa Sheni. The Masa Sheni was fine. The Masa Sheni was 4 Prutas. But all of a sudden, the Chomesh was less than a pruta, and then the whole thing is invalid. So that's the chiddush. Why, when it says diyo, that it has to refer to Rav Shimon ben Lakish and to Rav Asi, that it refers to when the chomish itself is not the chomish itself is what drags down the masasheni. So now, if that's the case, then we're back to the same question: whether or not Chizkiah's position. What is Chizkiah's position? So the Gemara says kasha. So at the end of the Gemara, this whole discussion that we've had with Chizkiah, whether or not it works or it doesn't work, the Gemara was trying to give all these permutations and combinations as to when it might work and when it doesn't work. And at the end of the Gemara says, no, we don't have a conclusion. And again, you're gonna. The question is, so what's the big deal? I mean, why are we going through this and looking at all these different minutia and different situations of whether or not one can give Maser Sheni? And the teretz is, again, in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, these were critical questions. Again, to us it's moot, so we kind of take it for granted. But when you had a Beis Hamikdash and there was a mitzvah of eating Maser Sheni in Yerushalayim, all these questions became very, very critical. What do we do? Can I redeem it? How do I redeem it? Or do I not redeem it? Do I take it? Do I eat it in Yerushalayim? Can I not eat it in Yerushalayim? So we have to project ourselves into the time of the Beis Hamikdash and see how complicated these halachas were. So, okay, so now take a look at Rashi. So we went through that other Rashi. Deyosha omalo kedechizkiah. Then it's enough that we hold like Chizkiah v'lo amrinan yamtin ad sheyalan in Yerushalayim, o yamtin ad sheyistarfenu im acher, the kiven the bechamusha leka pruta lo kachoshev v'deyo bekach. In other words, we're saying that since with the chomesh it is not worth a pruta, because the chomesh drags the whole amount, the combination of Maser Sheni and Chomesh down, right? And it's not worth a pruta. Lo kachoshev, it's not choshev, but lekach, and it's enough. So therefore, Chizkiah would say, okay, now I can attach it to that other coin. But if you're going to go according to the view of Rav Ami and Rabbi Yochanan, then what chiddush is there? We've already said many times before that if it's worth a shava pruta, that you can redeem it. So what's the chiddush here? There is no chiddush. The chiddush is only when you're going to add the chomesh, and it's going to become less than a total shava pruta. Then we're going to say that the halacha of Chizkiah still applies, and you can redeem the whole thing together. Ela lamanda oma aim bo. But according to the Manda Omar, Aimbo, my dio, right? My revusa, what's the chiddush? The itzach lemisna dio, lisna, oimahu v'chomsho, he and the chomish together are not equal Maser Sheni. What's the chiddush of dio? So therefore, that the word dio comes to prove that that it has to be the view of Rav Asi and Rish Lakish, because otherwise it's no different than what we've been saying before. There has to be a chiddush here, and the chiddush is only according to them that once you add the chomesh, that it drags it down to less than a shava pruta, but you can still redeem the whole mass.
But the chomesh is the rice of the same as Maser Sheni?
Correct. The chomesh is the rice, yes, just like the Maser Sheni. So what happens is that you have an interesting scenario.
One don't separate or do anything about the fact that they're both derisive. I mean, they could maybe override the chomesh and say in certain situations we'll ignore it or something. It's such a small amount.
Right.
No, but it's derisive. They can't ignore it.
Well, but again, you're seeing that even with these minutia amounts, with these small amounts, there is still a question of whether or not that small amount can derail the entire.
Oh, Maser Sheni.
What's that?
It could derail the whole Meister Sheni.
Oh, Ma'aser Sheni.
Right, because it's not redeemed if it doesn't have its chomesh.
That's right.
This gets to the whole interesting question that I don't think we've really answered, haven't really hardly touched on, which is Bisman Hazeh, or really any time there's no base of Mikdash. We say that there is this idea of redeeming it all in the OU and others, Starka, whatever, all these procedures where you're assigned, but effectively taking Meiser Sheni, which in theory should be a tenth plus a chomesh besides, and assigning it all to just like one little coin, and then I still can't
So
wrap
they
my head
combine
around
it.
how we do that.
OU then combines the whole requirement as one requirement.
Yeah.
Right, but not just as one requirement, as one tiny coin. In other words, they say to take a dime or something like that. In other words, it shouldn't be just a penny because that wouldn't be a pruta, etc. Fine. And then that doesn't matter. You could have, $50 worth of peppers or carrots or whatever, and you're assigning it all to a quarter, when you would logically, I would think you'd have to have, roughly 10% of the value. And that's not what we do now.
And again, it's because Bisman Hazeh, we don't have a base of Mikdash. We're very lenient in how we, because technically Midoraisa, there's no Ma'aser Sheni. This is all
right. I guess that where I get confused about it is when we talk about truma, which they say 40 or 50 or 60, but really it's any amount. Okay,
Right.
fine. So any amount. Well, shove a pruta and you're done. It doesn't matter how much stuff you have.
Right.
And yet Meiser Sheni, conceptually,
it's more
Meiser
precise.
to be a
Right,
tenth.
it's more precise. Right.
And yet we end up in that same sort of mode.
I think it goes back to the principle of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai after the Korban when he wanted to retain a memory of all
A memory, right? Exactly right.
It didn't have to be all that big amount, but the memory of it was important.
In other, you shouldn't lose the whole idea and then be Mashiach. What's Ma'aser Sheni? What are we talking about? Why are we even bothering? Because we had this Masorah that there was Ma'aser Sheni, so we kept the Masorah. Okay, I mean it's Zecher L'chor. I mean Zecher. Everything we say, we even say in our davening that in the Karbonos we say sometimes different Karbonos are Zecher for this carbon and this carbon. There's no carbon, but you don't want to forget the fact that there was a carbon. So we say it.
I guess now we have carbon.
That's a good point. That's a good point, David. Okay, so before we end, I just want to touch on the beginning of the next Gemara because there's a fascinating mathematical discussion here, which I want to introduce, and then we'll sort of think about for a minute. So now the Gemara is okay. So we basically now said this whole thing is too complicated. Kasha, it's a kasha. Now let's talk a minute about the chomesh. Because we haven't talked about the chomesh. We say, oh, the chomesh you have to add on. Was the chomesh a pruta? Was it not a pruta? What is this chomesh? How do you calculate the chomesh? Says the Gemara, there's a machlokes. Chumsha milagav. So when it says a chomesh, is it a chomesh milagav or chumsha milabar? What does this mean? Is it a chomesh of the principle of the inside, meaning of the actual maser, or it is a chomesh of
Ma'aser Sheni,
of the Ma'aser Sheni and the chomesh?
Right.
In other words, are you when the Torah says you have to have are you counting the principle, or are you counting the principle and the chomesh together? L'may nafkamina. Okay, we're going to see the nafkamina in a minute.
It's exactly to use modern accounting. It's exactly the difference between 20% gross profit versus 20% markup.
Right. Or put differently, is it 20% of the keren, or is it 25% of the total? In other words, when you add up the chomesh with the Ma'aser Sheni, you have to have 20% of that. The difference being that in one case the chomesh is actually 20%, in one case the chomesh is 25%, because in order to reach the 100% mark, you have to have 25% on top of the Ma'aser Sheni. So that's a fascinating discussion as to whether or not the whole chomesh what was the number of the Chaimish, you would think, oh, I mean, without thinking about it, I would have said, without even any thought, you know what, my masa sheni is five bushels. My Chaimish is 1 bushel. I mean, in my logic, that's what I would think would be the masa sheni. So what do you now have? So you have 5 plus 1. You have the masa sheni, and then you have the plus 1, which is the Chaimish. Says the Gemara, no. The whole idea is that at the end of the day, you have to have 5 bushels. How do you have 5 bushels when you start off with 4, right? You add the Chaimish so that the totality becomes 5 bushels, and that's a basic machlokes in the Gemara. So
we actually had the same basic issue that there was with the 6th on the question of what's onah, what's too much profit when you're selling, buying, etc.
Exactly.
How do you calculate it? Yeah.
Right. But again, the fact that the Gemara is raising the question shows how makbid they are on the particulars that you shouldn't be over. Otherwise, you could say, okay, well, we can always say go l'chumra, go l'kula, whatever. No, we want to know the exact amount. So just let's look at Rashi for a minute. Chom shem legav al shava esrim on 20 zeh mosef arba. Right, he adds 4. Shehein chumsho shel keren. So, in other words, it's the chomesh of the keren, because the keren was 20, and a fifth of 20 is 4. So now you have 24, right? O chumsho malabar al arba revias moisif chamishis min hachutz, from the outside davale esrim zuz chamisha zuz. So now it's not 4 zuz, it's 5, because when you look at it from the outside, you now have 25, and 25, that's the figure, right? Okay, so I just wanted to pose that question, because now we're going to go into a thing, but that's the starting point. So the Gemara gives a terrace, we're going to go weiter. I don't want to go into it now with the Zatoshma, but again, just to show how fascinating the discussion is that even in the Chomesh, okay, we already finished with the Masa Sheni. Now we're talking about the Chomesh. In the Chomesh, there's already a machlokes whether or not the Chomesh is Melagav Labar and what you have to give. So we have an appreciation for how careful halacha is that we want to do it right. If we're going to do it, we're going to do it right. So we have to have a full appreciation of what the Torah is telling us when it says Yechayev a Chomesh on top of Masa Sheni. Anyway, all right. So Mitzvah Shem will answer this question next week, and everybody who's mathematicians will ponder this question. What should be the correct view? Is it Melagav or Melabar? Is it from the inside or from the outside? What's the correct way of interpreting the Chomesh?
So you can understand why Moshe, when he went up both times, he didn't have any time to sleep.
No.
All of this had to go through.
He had to sit there and do all the mathematical calculation. Exactly right. Yeah, Michael, you're going to say something?
I'm just going to say Yasher Koach, Rabbi.
Okay. Again, what I love about it is our appreciation that here we are in the 21st century, and there's all kinds of complicated issues in halacha, and we are now debating the question of what is a chomesh and how is the chomesh tacked on to the Masa Sheni in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. I think that's the beauty of our Torah is that we can still plumb the depths of that today, even as we look at all the other halachic questions.
You make it alive. I mean, when I sit here, absolutely. I think I'm sitting in those arguments.
That's the point, because sometimes we ask the question, so what difference does it make? Yes, no, yes. The times you're right, we project ourselves. If we were in the Beis Hamikdash, we would be in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, we would have to, we were landowners, we have to go through all this. We have to deal with all this difficulty. Anyway, it's beautiful, and we should have a beautiful week, and Shalom Al Yisrael. Let's hope that we can redeem our Pidyon Shvuyim and bring everybody home to their families. The Banu Shalom should give us Shmira, and we should have a good week to everyone.
Amen.